All right, I think we're live. What is up, everyone? Welcome to the Self-Wired Book Club. Today with me, as always, is my friend Landon. I'm Noah, and we're discussing the last two parts of The Body Keeps the Score, parts 4 and 5. Part 4 is going to be more of like a synopsis, just a brief overview, because we really want to get into part 5, like the different methods Colt talks about in terms of how to recover from trauma. And something that I think is important to highlight is that it's not just for this, while this book is certainly for trauma victims, PTSD victims, everything exists on a spectrum. And so is the case with like traumatic events or negative events in your life. You can think of that as like the reason people have neuroses is from certain events in their life that may have affected them in a negative way. And so they react in maybe not the most favorable way or the way that they want to in certain scenarios. They may want to change something about themselves. And so maybe these methods that we present here today or that we talk about might help you. Landon, before we get into this, is there anything you wanna add?
Yeah, man, I'm excited. Let me try that again. I'm excited to get into this. We're gonna cover a ton of stuff, and we're gonna try to do it in the shortest time possible here. So, just a few key points. We're gonna be talking about our the ability to take things in our mind that we weren't successfully able to put in our larger memory system, right? The thing with trauma is a lot of the time you experience trauma in the here and now, and your body and your unconscious doesn't necessarily understand that this event happened in the past. So we're going to really be stressing different ways to put hardship behind us and move on. And like you were getting at, traumatic events exist on a spectrum, and all of us could benefit from applying some of these things to our lives and having a greater understanding of how we can not only move on from certain things, but integrate them in a successful way.
Yeah, I think I think it's just a good general life practice is, we don't want to just be surviving, we don't want to just be doing okay enough to get by. We want to find ways to thrive. And so these practices really help with that. And, as we'll talk about, I think a lot of this relays well with books I've been reading and things I've been reading regarding, meditation and improving our, to not sound too new agey, our vibrational state, to improving our frequencies, and we'll explain a bit more of what that may mean. But yeah, we're looking not to just get by, but to optimize, to live fullest life. And
Right.
so this may help you with that.
Yeah, so we're gonna touch on actual body movements. We're gonna touch on the applicability of theater, of music, of dance and chanting, and the part that I'm most excited about is utilizing imagination to help heal ourselves. So yeah, with that said, let's get right into part 4 in essence. So these are the head honchos of early psychology. We've got Freud, Jung, and William James. And what these people stressed intuitively, before we had the kind of technology that we have to prove what they were using their own clinical experience to talk about, was a lot of neuroses and trauma exist in past experiences. This is kind of intuitively obvious to anyone who's had to go through any, tough things and has suffered later on in life because of it. We're kind of tethered to that experience, and the experience itself kind of disables our ability to move on. And so these, in terms of talk therapy, in terms of psychoanalysis and in terms of getting, cultivating a greater understanding of yourself and of your past, we can move on and we can heal.
Yeah, it's what he's talking about here in part 4 is that it's something that we've talked about before, where with trauma, what we're seeing is like this mismatch between how someone perceives their environment to be. So with a negative experience of the past, with something that may have traumatized you, um, people perceive that event as ongoing, even though consciously we obviously understand that it is from the past. But what we're seeking to do is integrate that past experience that is stored in the body, that still shows up in our physiology when there's some type of trigger that arises from the environment. Someone says a certain thing in a certain way, or a loud noise goes off. What we're working to do is to integrate those bodily feelings, not only just with the conscious realization that it's from the past, but just making that into a coherent narrative, both in your mind and in your body, to where should a potential trigger come up in the future, you recognize that as the light, or um, I'm trying to think of a car alarm going off in the distance. You recognize it as just that, and not gunshots, occurring from when you were in Vietnam.
Right.
So yeah, it's just learning to reorganize the psyche, reorganize the body, to integrate, to get them into a coherent state with one another, to where perceptions are, you can live in the present moment. It's all about, we're trying to get people into the present moment, into the mindfulness of now, and not living stuck in the past.
Yeah. And one thing Vander Kolk kind of sets up in part 4 is an understanding of the way memory is processed. And this is, if you're going to work in clinical psychology, sadly, you might not get this kind of information inside of your toolkit for helping people. But it's incredibly important to understand the way that memory is processed, and when the processing of memory fails, it's important to understand how to get that working right again. And to, if you have a memory that, say, you don't have conscious access to, that doesn't mean the memory doesn't exist anymore for you, right? That just means it was so traumatic that your brain didn't necessarily understand how to integrate it into conscious awareness, so it pushes it outside of your view.
Right.
And this, when it does that, what Freud and Jung speak on a lot is this memory. You can think of it as kind of taking on a life of its own. And this is the idea of the unconscious that Freud came forward with and articulated so wonderfully, is understanding that your consciousness isn't all that there is inside of your brain. There's the majority of you is kind of under the surface, and gaining access to some of that and integrating it is the chief goal of successfully healing from trauma.
Right. Well, yeah, and it's important to distinguish that, like, with what we mean by integrating that, or bridging that from the unconscious to the conscious, is, in psychotherapy, that's typically terms of bringing it into conscious awareness, which is like typically something of CBT, or at least that was the earliest forms of psychotherapy. However, as time has gone on and as the field has developed, we've understood the interconnectedness of the body with the mind. And so really, there's more, that term, bridging things from the unconscious with the conscious mind, is bringing things that are stored in the body. Those are the unconscious. That's where, your unconscious programming is stored. That's why you react physiologically to uh, certain objects in the environment, and that's where the body keeps the score. And so
Right.
bringing that into consciousness is uh, mitigating or relieving those feelings for me.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, in terms of like in our last video, we stressed things like, autoimmune disorders. We saw correlations between obesity and traumatic events. You can go back and watch that video again if you're interested in the way in which unconscious memories that were inadequately processed come back in bodily malfunctions. It's not just, they were not just talking about psychology here. We're talking about the way in which, like you said, the body keeps this score. And even if our conscious mind doesn't have access to these memories, our body does. So yeah,
It's,
we'll get
it's
into
an
more.
insight. It's an insight into the homeostasis
Mm-hmm.
mechanism of, you could call it the homeostasis of the psyche. Like, you think of homeostasis meaning the body, it's this way of keeping itself in balance at all times. Well, in this case, you can think of when something like a traumatic event gets relegated to the unconscious, it gets stored in the body, and you can't remember why you're so tense, or like you don't know why you're so tense, or why you feel numbness in a certain area of your body, why you tingle in that area when someone tells you something, or you get aroused, or whatever it may be. That that is a. I'm sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought there for a second.
Happens to the best of us.
Yeah, well, I was saying that my the dang, what was I just? I can't look this up. What did I just say?
I don't know, man. You're
I just
talking
went
about,
off and I just lost what I just said.
like if you're someone says something in a certain way, and this part of your body tingles, or and you spoke on, of,
Yeah.
I'm not sure where you're going with it, but you talked about arousal a little bit.
It's just an insight into homeostasis of the psyche.
Okay, yeah.
Things that aren't in conscious awareness anymore, they get relegated to the body. And so even though you think it's gone, it never went away. It just transformed into physical form, and like in physical manifestation in in whatever it may be. Like I said, where you're numb, or you get tingling, um, you get chest pain, you get tightness, you can't breathe in certain situations. Uh, those are like psychological manifest. They can arise from a psychological origin. That's what I
Right.
was going with. So excuse my massive brain fart.
You're good, brother. All right. Oh, geez. I'm gonna try to switch slides here. It doesn't want to let me do it. Let's see.
You
This is
should
the
be able to click the arrow on your keyboard.
That's what I thought too. It didn't want to do it.
Okay. Well, anyways, yeah, this is something we can kind of go back to when we talked in part 2, I think, where we're dealing with. He brings up again the rational and emotional brain, and um, brain. We have to think about this again. Over time, it's built on top of older structures. So you can see this diagram that we had in part 2, where you have the reptilian, the limbic, and the I can't see what it says because this is in the way. The neocortex. So yeah, reptilian, limbic, and neocortex. And so over time, the oldest structure is the reptilian brain, and then the limbic brain came in, and then the rational, conscious, complex thinking faculties that we have today belong to the neocortex. That is the youngest. That's the youngest feature of our brains. And so what we're trying to do is bring that emotional brain and that reptilian, or I guess in this case the emotional limbic brain, bring it into coherence with the neocortex, because often in the case of trauma, when we're living by these unconscious instincts, these habits that we've developed from, childhood traumas, or it's usually childhood traumas where it's the hardest to break those habits, as opposed to ones that occur in late adulthood. But we're trying to relieve that hijacking. We're trying to get the rational brain back into coherence with the limbic brain, and that's what it means to own yourself.
This is why mindfulness is so incredibly important. It's kind of a buzzword as of late, but psychology is looking at meditation and seeing this capacity for the alleviation of this hijacking that we're seeing so much of, in terms of flashbacks, in terms of anxiety, even depression. We see this ability of getting in tune with your breath and feeling your feelings, and learning to shift from a state of hyper arousal to a state of peace and relaxation. And it's kind of a muscle that you can a muscle that you can develop in order to take back control over your brain and reside in this neocortex. And we've stressed this so much in earlier podcasts, that this reptilian brain takes over your ability to think logically, and so someone can be in therapy and be talking about a way they feel and a behavior that they're constantly enacting out, that they're having an issue with, and that brought them to therapy in the first place. And they understand that this isn't a rational way of acting. They understand that they're not thinking rationally, that they're not using their brain the way they want to use their brain. Well, it's because their instinctual self and their emotional self is taking control of them. And so it's of optimal importance to kind of learn how to reside in the region of your brain that you want to reside in.
Yeah, and as you can see here, these numbered sections, these 6 sections, are pretty much these are the 6 means he describes to kind of deal with this, or to befriend this emotional brain, so that way, we don't have that hijacking. We don't have that horse taking off on the rider, on the prolific rider. That was one metaphor he used a couple parts ago. So, and the main thing to focus on in these sections is that we're looking at breathing, good breathing and chanting to control the autonomic nervous system and to affect the vagus nerve, the cranial nerve that runs from the brain into the gastrointestinal region, and it manages a lot of digestive function, and it manages everything within the digestive region, and also with the heart, I believe, as well. And that's dealing with hyperarousal. That's what he means when he's saying dealing with hyperarousal. We are able to tune into the autonomic nervous system, the automatic nervous system, by controlling our breathing. Because, think about breathing. It's like a semi-conscious phenomenon. Like, you can think about your breathing and modulate your breathing, but you also don't have to. And it can become unconscious where you don't have to think about it. And it'll occur on its own, for better or for worse. He brings into mind, a lot of ancient breathing practices that have been around for thousands of years, or at least practices that tune into the body, that seek to balance balance the autonomic nervous system with our conscious control, and to bring the two into coherence, bringing the emotional brain, the limbic brain, and even you could even say the reptilian brain, into coherence with the neocortex. What's funny, what I think is just funny to highlight about that is, when you think of meditation, mindfulness meditation, you think of these breathing, chanting practices, these bodily practices, martial arts. They're deemed alternative practices. Now, think about the word alternative. It means alter. It means, alter and native. That's changing nature or natural, something that's native. which is paradoxical considering that these are the practices that are most native in this compared to our modern allopathic Western form of medicine, um, which is very new in comparison to these forms of healing, uh, and they seem to be doing a pretty good job. And um, a lot of pharmaceutical intervention pales in comparison to these methods, and or at least it does a lot. They do a lot better when in conjunction
Yeah.
with bodily practices, because we're looking to heal the body, obviously. So why not tap into the body through things that have been around for so long?
Yeah, and it's it's nice to see that it's starting to become more accepted, I would say. Like I was learning about mindfulness meditation in my intro to psych class, which was it was nice because I think a lot of people have a misconception that, if you are someone who meditates, you're sitting in the lotus pose and having mystical experiences. In reality, it's much more simple than that. Get in touch with your body, get in touch with your breath, and start observing the thoughts that are going on in your head,
Mhm.
because like you were talking about with breathing and the way that it's semi-conscious. You can forget that you're breathing, and it can be, out of awareness at all. As soon as you remember that you're breathing, you're aware of it. It's the same thing with your thoughts. You think and you're not aware of the thoughts that are going on in your head, and once you become aware of them, you can begin to change your internal dialogue. That's obviously so important for mental health. What kind of thoughts are going on in your head, and what emotions are you feeling, and can you change them? Because if you can consciously change them, you're on the road to recovery for a lot of people, especially in more mild um, forms of depression and anxiety. But I mean, even with people with PTSD and severe trauma, we're seeing that getting in tune with this kind of capacity for you to control your own emotions, thoughts, and your autonomic uh, brain usage, we're seeing, you know, uh, immense benefits.
Right. Yeah, and like you said that with mindfulness, it's not only about recognizing your thought patterns and recognizing these patterns that you may have, these programs that you developed over time as a result of your experience in the world, your experience with others, but it's also recognizing the patterns you have in your body, like how noticing like when a feeling arises when you do think about something, or noticing in a moment. You didn't it's just, this may not even be during a meditation. This doesn't have to be during a meditation. It can be when you're speaking with others, or when you're out in the world. You become more mindful of yourself in general, and
Mm.
you notice like you might get angry at something that seems that's actually fairly trivial, and you can actually go, oh, why am I getting so upset about this thing? What may have caused that, and why is it that I see why is it that repeatedly happens to me, and it cascades down from there to where you can actually get more to root cause of things, and you can really make lasting change. Um, so yeah, breathing and mindfulness meditation, uh, bodily practice in general, martial arts. Um, he mentions yoga that we'll talk about, Tai Chi, Qigong, rhythmic drumming. That's an ancient African practice. Capoeira, which is a Brazilian martial art. Aikido, Jiu-Jitsu, Taekwondo. Um, he lists these off, and these are just getting us to feel again in our bodies, and um, also think about these also help us to get in community with others, and to get related to others. To get into relationships was another big aspect to focus on here. Is the relationship aspect. We've talked before about how a big part of healing from trauma is reconnecting ourselves, reintegrating ourselves with others, given that we are such social creatures, and learning to develop relationships again, uh, but to do so qualitatively, to develop really connecting, um, reciprocal relationships where we actually feel heard and spoken.
Yeah, well said.
Right.
Miracle and tyranny. All right, take it away, Noah. what do we got here? Apollo and Dionysus.
Yes, Apollo and Dionysus. Let's go off track for just a second here. Landon and I have read this book called The Birth of Tragedy, which is written by Friedrich Nietzsche. It's a pretty interesting book because what we pulled from it is the Apollonian and Dionysian, and we're trying to bring that duality that Nietzsche lays out and relate it to language, because as you can see here, language being miracle and tyranny, it's a duality in itself. It's a double-edged sword. And so you could think of Apollo as being the miracle aspect of language, and Dionysus is like showing or um, highlighting the tyrannical aspect of language, because it can only do so much. It can, while language helps to trauma and helps to articulate things that we may not have confronted before and are unknown to us. It helps to bring it into the known so that we can better understand it and better learn how to go about handling it.
One, just really quickly, one way I kind of conceptualize the antithesis of these two Greek gods is Apollo is kind of the words to the song. Dionysus is the music behind the words. So we've got the articulated version of what's going on, the words going on in your head, and then Dionysus as the emotional background to that. The words are kind of describing the emotion. And a lot of the time, the rational words are a lot easier to relay to someone else, a lot easier to process than the intensity of the emotion behind them.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it, because in Nietzsche's case, he's talking about, well, theater, but he also relates this to Richard Wagner with his music as well. Yeah, this relates to any form of art. That's what The Birth of Tragedy was talking about. He was talking about what makes great art. That's kind of what Nietzsche was trying to get at. And so the Apollonian, the miracle aspect of language, what that allows us to do is to write or to self-author, to, like I said, go deep within ourselves and to learn about ourselves, and to speculate on why we may feel the way we do, why we think the way we do, and how that is we may change that, or why it is what's good about the way we think, what's not, what way we could change, and how we can be better go about that. There's so many great things with knowledge. Apollo is the god of the sun. He's the god of consciousness, of insight and focus and reason. He's the he's the apotheosis of consciousness, of the known. Whereas Dionysus was deemed the god of the unknown. He was like a foreign god almost. He was the god of the East, I believe, as some stories have it. He was the god of the East because he represented that, like you said, that emotional aspect, that aspect that cannot be pinned down by words. Apollo can bring form to it and can help you to see it in some form. He has to bring its own form, whereas the thing in itself, the Dionysus part, that part can't be explained fully, and it can only be felt. It can only be experienced. And that's where like art and music and dance come in to help with trauma, because those are obviously, art. They're artistic means. They're forms of creative expression, and those things, creative expression is in essence seeking to articulate a thing or articulate things that can never be truly exhausted. It's an eternal source of life. This creative instinct to dance, to sing, to paint. You're glimpsing at something. You bring form to something by engaging in the art, by dancing, whatever it may be. You bring a certain form to it. Like you learn scales to play an instrument, to learn music, However, through that form, you're seeking to um, kind of express something deeper. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So to relate this back to the way that Van der Kolk described it is this, so this art antithesis, as Nietzsche put it, was it was developed entirely in terms of philosophical understanding of of art and human nature, and so recently neuroscientists have come out, and we understand that we essentially have two different forms of a sense of self. So what we laid out as Apollo is called the autobiographical self, and the system's rooted in language, and it's a narrative, right? So it's kind of the story that we're telling ourselves about our past, about who we are as a person. Someone asks you who you are, what have you been through in your life, this is the narrative that you would espouse, right? And so this Dionysian self that we laid out is the moment to moment self-awareness, and it's based primarily in physical sensations, and this is something that, unless we're in a sense of safety, we have issues relaying this sense of physical sensation, the sense of emotion. It's hard to translate this Dionysian experience into the language of Apollo, right? So this is incredibly helpful. We're going to be dealing a lot in these slides with different forms of self, and one thing to stress is that you're not one person. You're made up of a bunch of different emotions. A lot of them are at war with each other, and depending on who you're around, you describe yourself in a different way. You use different words to relay your experience. You're a whole bunch of different emotions and different experiences, and they each come out at different times depending on the circumstance. So we laid out, in the middle you see the body. The body is the bridge between these two different sense of selves, right? um, we can use our body as kind of like the focal point for our sense of self. And I don't know if you have anything to say on that aspect of the body as the bridge. You kind of touched on it in terms of dance, and obviously emotions are centered heavily in the body.
Yeah, it's it's in one part, like the body is the bridge. Is I think one way to understand that is you take what you feel and just bringing your feelings into consciousness. That's like, bringing form to things. That's like the Apollo aspect. Um, but also, you could think of the body as the bridge in that it, so you have to take, it's never, you can't fully understand this in a totally rational, or you can't resolve neuroses or trauma in a totally rational, coherent, logical, Apollo-like fashion. And you can't also leave things totally in the unknown and seek to do it through bodily means by itself. You have to bring form to that thing, and then that's, like we said, that's where the art, that's where truly great art comes in. It's that blend of form with the emotional vitality. That's where the body, that's the life force of it. And so you bring in those two things together through like writing. Free writing is the rational form, and creative expression. Then you make immense gains. You make great. That's where healing really um, sets in.
Right. So, and anyone listening who has been involved in therapy themselves is probably familiar with the therapist or the counselor, kind of checking in with you and going, well, how do you feel right now? Well, you're describing something in a rational way. I act like this because of this. This person made me feel this way. They want you to tune in to the Dionysian aspect of yourself and allow it to be translated in the words of Apollo. How describe to me how your emotions feel using words, right? And so a lot of the time they won't even necessarily tune into how you're feeling emotionally, but it's like, what do your hands feel right now? Do you feel yourself sit? Do you feel the cushion underneath you? That pillow behind your back, how does that feel on your back? You tune into your body and you get closer to your emotions. And then once you feel safe in that way, you can construct a narrative. And then eventually these two different systems are working in conjunction. They're not split off. In some forms of psychotherapy theory, you can kind of describe someone as like a decapitated head, right? They're out of tune with their emotions. They only think rationally, they only think logically, and this is it might be helpful in some circumstances, but to push out this Dionysian emotional aspect of yourself uh, can result in a lot of problems down the road. If these two different systems aren't working in conjunction, you can have a lot of issues either emotionally, or you can have a lot of issues thinking rationally. So
Yeah, you see the pattern of coherence come
mm,
up multiple times in terms of the means to go about healing. You're trying to bring, in this case, Apollo and Dionysus thinking and feeling into coherence. You're trying to bring the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system into coherence. You're trying to bring coherence with your internal feelings and the way you relate to others. You're trying to bring coherence between your interpersonal relationships. So that's kind of like, if you were to abstract, the means to heal with from this, it's about bringing things back into coherence.
right.
And
So
you see
this
the
brings
pattern
us
very much.
to this issue of coherence brings us to a big chunk of this chapter was devoted to a study conducted in a college where people were kind of asked to write about an incredibly traumatic events, right? So they took people with certain forms of trauma, whether that be emotional or physical abuse, or sexual molestation, and you can see these people that have a history of trauma have they're much more likely to have depression, anxiety, obviously, PTSD, obviously, but they're also more likely to go to the doctor for ailments, the school doctor for these ailments. And so this is kind of tracked, and they can see this correlation between trauma and physical illness. So they ask them to take this event. A lot of the time these people had never spoken about this event with anyone in their life, but they can journal about it in a safe way. No one's going to read this event, right? And they found that this was incredibly helpful. These people that had kind of pushed these intense emotions aside and had never allowed them into consciousness and had never relayed the experience to anyone, by articulating specifically what the event was, how it made them feel, the impact on the rest of their life. And by doing this constantly and putting these Apollonian words to these intense Dionysian experiences, resulted in immense healing, both psychologically and physically. Again, the body's this bridge between these two forms, where uh, these intense emotions result in visceral physical sensations. And so by relaying these in a way and getting these two systems in accord with each other via uh, writing out a narrative and telling the story, there was a sense of homeostasis that was gained as a result.
Right.
Yeah, it was interesting. They have some pictures of individuals who were asked to journal with their therapist, and one of the things you'll notice is, again, we're going to get into different forms of self. One thing that they noticed in these journals is a discrepancy between handwriting, right? So you're kind of relaying one thing, and then a different form of yourself kind of takes over, and your handwriting changes from nice and neat to scattered, and or from small to large. The tone of the voice that you're using in terms of writing changes, and so it's kind of an example of these different forms of self that come out of unconsciousness and make themselves present on the page.
Yeah, yeah. I think you explained it well. Like there's certain triggers you can have in the environment, like we said before, where you'll notice physiological changes, and then in this case, that includes like the muscular, movement of your fingers to when you're writing, in your handwriting. So when you're writing about something that may traumatic, perhaps it gets really small or it gets really scribbled. It's just little differences like that that really give an insight to the body keeping the score.
Mm-hmm. All right, we both got really excited about this subject. This is EMDR, which is a little bit of a mystery in present day psychology. We understand a little bit of the mechanism, and there's a lot of theories about how and why this works, but van der Kolk was of the opinion that he was of the opinion that this is kind of one of those new age strange things that psychologists started doing, but it probably didn't really work, and he wasn't super convinced until his patients started going to different therapists to get this done. And he had so many stories of people going, hey, check out EMDR. This stuff is top notch. This has helped me, within 4 sessions of it. And so just a brief example of what this is. This is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. So essentially, if you're a therapist, person comes to you with a traumatic event, right? And so what you do as a therapist is you have them.
Hang on, can you hear me, Landon? I think I accidentally muted you. I apologize. You're back.
It's a little bit passive aggressive, don't you think?
Yeah, I really just didn't like what you were having to say, so I was trying to find a nice way to do it. But
You've had enough of Landon. So essentially, what EMDR is the person comes to you, and you as the patient relay the traumatic event, and your therapist is going to take their finger and you're going to track their finger with your eyes, right? And so one of the theories for why this is, and one of the theories that van der Kolk lays out, is this is kind of tuning you into REM sleep. And in REM sleep, a lot of what we discussed earlier of memory processing, that's when that happens, right? So this REM sleep, for those of you who don't know, is rapid eye movement. And so when you're in this state while you're sleeping, your eyes are moving back and forth. So that's what
I wouldn't say that it's tuning you into REM sleep, but there's something to do with like the rapid eye movements themselves that have some mechanism of helping to process memories in the same way that rapid eye movement and during rapid eye movement sleep, dream images or dreaming occurs.
Right,
because Kolk was talking to these patients, he was recounting what they had seen in between these periods of the eye movement desensitization. So he would ask them to recall a certain event or a certain feeling in a certain event, and he would tell them to just hold that, and he would begin this process of telling them to watch his finger, and they would have this lateral rapid eye movement, um, and that hence the eye movement desensitization. Um, and then during that, or there would be bouts of that, and there would be intervals in between where he would stop, he would ask, the therapist would ask, um, what do you feel? How about now? Like, how do you feel now? And they would then recall these, they would bring up these images. They had these images in their head that sounded, they're very vivid. They were very strange. They were dreamlike. They were, in terms of like the environment they were in. Um, it wasn't like they were, specific past memories. Sometimes they were, and sometimes they are, but sometimes they were just images of them in. I believe one woman was just in a coffee shop with her boyfriend, and I don't believe that was a specific event in her life necessarily, because her abusive father, then came in and began to, um, I believe, beat the boyfriend. Um, and I don't believe that was an actual event in her life, but then it was just the environment that she was in. It was strange, like, she put herself like in this environment that didn't actually occur, and it was very much like dreaming. So, and
Right.
then the
So,
eye
well,
movement has some correlation there.
this is when imagination starts to come in. If you remember our first video, the Van der Kolk starts off the book with a story of a child who had witnessed 9/11, and thankfully the child was he had been raised in a way where he had kind of optimal resources for his psyche to work through trauma appropriately, right? So the child had seen someone jump out of the one of the towers, and he drew a picture of this event, but at the bottom he puts a trampoline so the person would be safe, right? So this is an example of the imagination coming into play in order to help us process information and integrate traumatic memories successfully. So some of these stories were imaginative events that had never happened, but they were, how do I want to say, they were different ways in which an event could have happened that would have been optimal, right? So they use their imagination to imagine an appropriate solution to the problem that they were presented with, which is in some theories what dreams are meant to do. Dreams are meant to help you process memories, and um, they're kind of this imaginative landscape, and people report big dreams where solutions to problems were presented, or they had a traumatic event happened, but the trauma wasn't as big of a deal because the narrative of the dream was one of the optimal solution. We're going to see this later on in the slides of you can access trauma and then use your imagination to form a better version of the events that happened.
Yeah, like with whether or not you take dreams as, um, divine prophecies of, and guiding principles of individuation, or you take them as, um, random events, which I would say is bogus to that. But, nonetheless, they help you to. There's some mechanism that helps you to process memories and to like store. We understand that has a cognitive function, helping you process past events, because you might dream of something. I can recall, like, you'll dream of something that you might have seen that day, or something you learned about that day, and it comes into dreams. And typically when I see that, I think, that's, it reminds me of that cognitive, that aspect of dreams. Sure, dreams are symbolic, and they have perhaps something from the unconscious is springing forth to give you an insight into your life. However, there's also that element of dreams that helps to process memories. And this eye movement desensitization may help one to reprocess the traumatic event and to bring it more into coherence with the present moment in which they currently live, where they're out of the past environment. And to explain the two images here on the right, you know, active imagination, which is a form of kind of a form of getting into the unconscious mind, like almost to have a mystical experience. This was formed by the psychologist Carl Jung, active imagination. And during that practice, you can look this up. If you want to learn how to get into active imagination, where you sit there and you can have your eyes closed, or you can just be in a dark room staring straight ahead. However, for this sake, we're going to talk about with your eyes closed. And what you do is you rapidly move your eyes. Um, and so that'll help you to get you into this state where you have intense visualizations of your unconscious mind, and you have these images pop up. So there's one correlation again with the rapid eye movement. What's this mechanism? Um, and Ed from The Lion King, the crazy hyena, Jordan Peterson talked about this in his lecture of Carl Jung's depth psychology, where in schizophrenia, involuntary eye movements are a symptom or a hallmark symptom. And schizophrenia, one of the symptoms of schizophrenia is also hallucinations. Um, this study we've cited here by Peter Carr talks about the augmenting EMDR-like states, where you have these pseudo hallucinogenic states, these dreamlike states, stimulated by photic stimulation, by these glasses you would wear. If you're interested in that, you can go look more into that. You can go read that. But it just goes to show this pattern that comes across, where even in schizophrenic types, where the hallucinations may be more pathological, they may not serve the individual well, these imaginatory hallucinogenic states have some function to heal us. And that's one more reason to, even if you don't do EMDR necessarily, but to tune into your dreams perhaps, because they do have a purpose to keep you in homeostasis. And maybe if they're a bit more intrusive, to where maybe they're waking you up in the night, or they are, you're having multiple nightmares, perhaps that's telling you something about, that's trying to give you an insight into this dream. Because dreams with an emotional charge are very important. They tend to relay an important message about your current psychological state. So if you're currently having nightmares, perhaps there's about some similar event or some repeated event in your dreams. There's a repeated pattern, and you have the same emotion. Perhaps there's something worth investigating.
Right. Yeah. So just to kind of form a synopsis of the different ways that we went about kind of describing the mystery of EMDR is it triggers something in your brain related to memory processing, and this is most likely an aspect of REM sleep, right? So this allows you to consciously do what in some cases your dream state is not enabling you to do, which is process the memory and consolidate it into the larger memory system as a whole. And the statistics for this are pretty impressive. There was something like a 40% decrease in PTSD symptoms after just a few sessions, a few weeks of doing EMDR, which is staggering if you look at kind of the persistence of PTSD symptoms, which obviously have to do with a memory that is not quite being processed accurately. And yeah, this title of the article down here by Peter Carr gets into this in terms of schizophrenia, and this touches more on what we've been discussing in terms of sleep, where schizophrenia can kind of be thought of as the dream state interfering with the conscious state, which could be the aspect that is responsible for the hallucinations. And so what Peter Carr is suggesting is that maybe this EMDR is allowing the schizophrenic individual to kind of rewire the memory that is impacting schizophrenia. As we learned earlier, a lot of schizophrenic hallucinations have to do with original trauma, and the hallucinations will take the voice or the hallucinatory aspect of someone who traumatized them. So it's this idea that we can impact the state of mind that is present during dreams in conscious states in order to reprocess memories, and then afterwards, in a lot of cases, reimagine an alternative which would promote healing.
Yeah, yeah, I think that sums it up pretty well.
All right. Boom, yoga.
Yes.
All right. So introception is kind of your ability to look inside of yourself. You know, your ability to feel the emotions, feel your put words to emotions, and feel issues inside of yourself. Another little vocab word that we failed to touch on that we should have done earlier is something called alexithymia. Alexithymia is the inability to feel and put words to what you're feeling inside. So someone with alexithymia who can't articulate what they're feeling might go to a doctor with a bunch of symptoms and not really be able to articulate what the symptoms are to their doctor. Therefore, they can't really get a solid diagnosis. This can happen with emotions or with bodily sensations. So introception is kind of the solution to that problem. You increase the awareness. And so this is, when we talk about meditation, this is something that helps develop introception, but more importantly to this chapter, yoga. Stretches are something, yoga, which is, essentially stretching and meditation, is something that Van der Kolk stresses the whole way through the book. Is he's an advocate of this in all forms of neuroses, all forms of mental health diseases. This is something that has proven itself to be incredibly beneficial to all of his clients that have tried it.
Yeah, I mean, just based on what we've talked about, the title of the book and what we've been talking about, it's obvious to see the influence of yoga in helping to get one more engaged with their body. It is a physical practice. That is the essence of yoga. Regardless of the practice, it's to develop the mind-body connection. There's different forms of yoga listed some below. Some are more intense, while some may be more relaxed. Some have different series of poses, but nonetheless, it is intended to get one aware, to develop this interoception, to have an awareness of body-based feelings. And I don't believe Colt touched on this, but there's a certain quality to yoga that I find personally for myself very helpful, which is the aspect I always appreciated this. I watched a yoga. I was following a yoga routine when I was like 16 or something. It was like a DVD, and I was watching it, and the instructor said to have equanimity. And equanimity is like that, is to have the calm within the storm, which in the case of trauma is a very important attribute, to have that ability to observe, to feel, or to notice the feelings, and to know how to act going forward, and how to relieve those feelings, but also to hold strong, or find some type of calm within your current state, within that pose. Because anyone who's done yoga knows that it is not, especially like hot yoga or something like that. It's not, the easy lackadaisical type of. It's not as easy as you might think it is.
Yeah, well, it's
You've done hot yoga, haven't you?
Yeah, it's wonderful to because it gets you in a certain state of, similar to any kind of exercise, where your mind quiets down a little bit and you can get more in tune with your body. And it's beautiful for that, which is why it's so helpful for introspection. One thing that really was interesting in terms of reading this chapter is like, I thought, like, I can see how this could get you in tune with your body, and I can see how it's helpful for cultivating mindfulness and everything like that. But the stories that he gave of people doing this, it was very much an incredibly intense experience for those patients of his that had been impacted by traumatic events, in a in a in a large way, right? So he was stressing in there the people that he would allow to guide these guided yoga sessions. He would stress, take it slow, because he's having people run out and not come back to counseling for weeks after binging whatever substance that they were abusing, or doing whatever kind of destructive behavior had brought them into therapy in the first place, because it was so freaking intense that it was bringing back all these intense traumatic events that had happened. So it's very much, I don't think a lot of people appreciate the strength of this practice as something that can cultivate healing, and also something to respect and to take slowly, and to get in tune with yourself in a gradual way.
Well, I have like an example of that with that I guess, you know, that emphasis to take it slow in my life, where I was doing Wim Hof breathing. I was doing a Wim Hof practice before I exposed myself to the cold. Um, I think I was just taking a cold shower, but it was in the mornings. It was in the morning, and I had just finished the Wim Hof breathing session. I noticed, like, whenever I do the Wim Hof breathing, I start to feel. I don't know if it's just the the rapid inhalation or just the rapid nature of the breathing I'm doing. It's like a pranayama type of breath. It just gets me like really fired up, and like I almost feel like an anger kind of develop, like a fire. Um, but then when I exposed myself to the cold, I was already in this tense state, and it was the mix of the emotions experienced with the breathing, and then wherever they came from that came up during that breathing, and then the cold exposure, I just broke down and started crying. Just like sobbing. It wasn't. It was like bodily, visceral, like this. Um, it wasn't like moaning necessarily, but it was just like a rhythmic sobbing almost, where I was just feeling it in my viscera.
Right.
And
I've had similar experiences in playing around with hot yoga, where I've had to, at certain points there's, memories coming back from childhood that are incredibly visceral, and that, you didn't realize that you had access to until you were in a state of allowance, and in a state of kind of getting in tune with an emotion that had become alien to you, and kind of having to tap out of hot yoga and lay down and get my grips again, playing, when one thing to stress is with yoga, this isn't just stretching. This is he has all these different we have all these different kinds of yoga listed out, and Vander Kolk stresses chanting. You can use mantras, like you mentioned, pranayama, breathing techniques. All of these things take you to a state that allow you to access these emotions. So yeah, sorry if I cut you off at all.
no, you're fine. That was good. I was just gonna say that with yeah, it's just me and you both. It just kind of highlights the need to, if you feel, oh, I guess ironically you wouldn't feel, but if you're dealing with like a numbness, or like some traumatic problem, or if you don't even realize it, if you're getting into these bodily practices for the sake of kind of reconnecting yourself to your body, and trying to awaken past uh, emotions, from past experiences, you might come up on things that you did not expect would be there.
Mhm.
So
All right. So this is neurofeedback, and this is amazing. If anyone wants to do a little bit more research outside of the book, there's extensive articles, extensive videos on YouTube where you can actually watch this happening. It's really interesting. So a little background information for those of you watching who haven't read the book. This is the individual suffering anything from PTSD to ADHD to depression, anxiety, anything along those lines. You're brought in and hooked up with this fancy little helmet that measures brain waves, right? And so in this example, you see the hot air balloon. In the book, he described a like a rocket ship. The the helmet measures optimal brain waves, right? So in the book, if you're in the brain state that the individual who's guiding this session would like to see you in, the rocket ship flies in a way that's good, right? It'll like veer out of the way of any space matter that it might hit. You know, it flies smoothly, and you can see on the screen that you're doing the right thing, and you can feel in your body that you're doing the right thing. So it kind of matches up, gives you a visual representation of what your brain is doing and what the optimal state feels like. However, if you're in a brain state that is inoptimal, the rocket ship might crash, and you'll have to start over. So it's kind of this game you play, and you can see, like I said, you see a visual representation of what it is your brain is doing. So this it's measuring frequencies. So and it measures frequencies in hertz. So 2 to 5 hertz. It's kind of foggy thinking. This is characteristic of ADHD and depression, or I'm sorry, ADHD and PTSD. Theta frequencies, which are in the 5 to 8 hertz. This is kind of what you feel in the edge of sleep, incredibly relaxed, about to doze off. Alpha waves are 8 to 12 hertz. This is peace and calm, akin to meditation. 13 to 20, this is the beta frequency, and you're oriented towards the outside world. So what this means is the individual, by being able to see a representation of what kind of brainwave frequency they're in, is able to change their brainwave frequency, which is amazing. And so if you take someone with ADHD, for example, and then they're in this slow frequency of 2 to 5 hertz, and it's impacting their school performance, they can be brought in and have a few sessions of this where they're playing this game, and they're learning to change their brain waves in order to get closer to an alpha wave of 8 to 12, so they can focus better, or even above that into the 13 to 20, and kind of be very attentive to their immediate outside world. So this is a fairly recent development in the way in which psychology is kind of combining with technology, and we're able to learn that we can change our state of mind. We can change the brain waves that are going through our brain, and we can choose the most optimal form of brain wave for the task at hand. And we can shift away from inoptimal brain waves that are symptomatic of different mental health disorders. Yeah, the what the founder of this and experts will say about it is that this works best in individuals who understand that the shift in brain waves is something that they're doing themselves. So they're the ones who are impacting the way their brain is working. It has nothing to do with external force. This is a practice of introspection. How can I change my emotions, and change my the way in which I'm using my brain to optimize my performance and decrease symptoms?
Yeah, I think something that's so cool about this is people may not realize how readily accessible this is to to achieve, because, or how readily accessible this is to you, because essentially, like, you have the screen in the elaborate headgear. However, essentially what you're doing is a visualization practice, and this screen is helping you to achieve a visualization practice of immersing you in a specific environment. Um, because we're creatures formed by our external environment. That's how evolution works. We've evolved in response to our environment. So we if we're situated in a certain environment, our physiology and our patterns, our genes express in a certain fashion to fit that environment. And so what this is doing is helping us to immerse ourselves in a environment to set our frequencies, either to a higher or lower state, depending if you're more anxiety aggressive prone, which would be a higher beta state, as opposed to a depressive state, which is, resides in this theta delta brainwave states. And but you can achieve this visualization by going within, by something that is actually a meditation practice given by Joe Dispenza in his book Becoming Supernatural, that I'm reading right now, which I find well uh, in relation to this, is you have to change your energy, to change your brainwave state, because all energy, all cells, all matter, all of what makes us, it functions through transmitting information, and it transmits information through energy and matter. That means it translates things through wave and particle. Think of light. Light is both simultaneously a wave and a particle. It's like paradoxical like that. It's never it's one or the other, depending on how we set it up in an experiment. So what we're talking about here is the waves, is the energy form. And what we want to do is change our energy, because when we're stuck in these lower delta brainwave states, we're stuck in we're stuck in the autonomic nervous system, essentially, these lower order functions. That's why they function at a lower frequency, because they're at a lower energy level, whereas higher frequencies have higher energy levels. And so what we want to do is get out of that survival mode, get out of the autonomic nervous system where we're living in survival, in these emotions of anger and fear, guilt, shame, lack. And we want to have an intention to elevate our brainwaves through achieving a certain emotion, because we have access to do that ourselves. It's readily available. We can make ourselves feel certain emotions. It may take practice through uh, multiple uh, sessions of meditation, of getting quiet with oneself, and practicing our visualization. But we can set our environment. Think of how your physiology, think of how your heart races when you dream, or think of when people have wet dreams, how they can have sexually charged dreams. It's because your body and your brain can't distinguish from an internal experience from an external experience. So if you can switch your internal state and you can achieve this visualization, you can help to relieve yourself of these PTSD like symptoms, or these ADHD like symptoms. In the case of the um, lower brainwave state, we can seek to find our calm, or we can seek to find or we can achieve our calm. I'm sorry, we can achieve our calm, or we can achieve our heightened energy through the intention to do so, and through experiencing, getting quiet with oneself, and actually experiencing that emotion associated with with feeling alive, with feeling whole and powerful, content, in love with life. Really trying to sit down and feel and see what that feels like in the body, um, and then meditating on it and breathing into the body, and really sitting with the body, and um, seeing what comes up. And that's what I find so fascinating about neurofeedback. This specific practice.
Yeah, we can. We use our brains. I think a lot of people misunderstand it and think that your brain kind of does its own thing. You don't really have that much say over what your brain does. You can't see your brain. You can't really you can't shift how it works in the same way that you can a muscle. But what this is showing is that there is a lot of your brain that you have access to, and that your internal state a lot of the time is under your control if you figure out how to access it and use it appropriately.
Right.
And this is one of those ways in which you can change something like a brain wave, and in changing your brain wave, change your experience and change how well you're able to use
Yeah.
your brain.
Just to clarify one more thing is, I don't want people to think that um, that we're totally, everything is totally in our heads, and we should never allow external things to shape us, or external things never do shape us, because that's obviously not the case. And um, but what we have to realize is, and this is a Stoic idea I find very helpful, is with everything that seems to happen outside of our control, or everything that seems to occur outside of our control, we can't control what's happened to us in the past, how others have treated us. We can't control the emotions of others, etc. But with everything that happens to us, we have a corresponding call to respond in the way that we deem fit, in the way that we wish to respond. And in this case, though we may have been traumatized in the past, we may have been hurt, we may feel like we lack a certain quality. We have the chance to change that in each moment, and to go forward in the way that we see fit. So that's all I wanted.
All right. So self-leadership, internal family systems. Um, so this goes back to the idea that you're not one individual self. You've got a manager, a firefighter, and an exile going on. At least in
Yeah,
this example. So this is kind of a tool that is utilized in some forms of therapy, and this tool breaks yourself into these three subcomponents. So we've got managers, which the managers are there inside of you in order to help prevent humiliation and feelings of abandonment. The managers kind of control access to emotions. Uh, Firefighters are there to extinguish emotional pain, essentially. You can think of this: a firefighter will destroy an entire house in order to stop the fire itself. In the same way, the firefighter inside of you will do anything to alleviate emotional pain. And then here in the middle, we have the exiled. And the exile is the part of you that is the genuine feeling of trauma that the firefighter is attempting to extinguish, and that the manager is attempting to um, push out of consciousness and prevent from you feeling. Van der Kolk describes the exile as the toxic waste dump of the system, which is obviously a pretty harsh way of articulating this aspect of you, because this aspect of you is an incredibly harsh emotion, and it's an incredibly harsh event. So the idea of internal family systems therapy is that um, you can kind of objectify and project these internal pieces of yourself and come to understand them as a family that resides inside of you. And the family might be tumultuous, and the family might have its issues, but it's a family. And so you can kind of learn to deal with that and live inside of yourself as with all of these different subcomponents of you, integrated in a healthy way. So what you can do is you have a chair that represents the manager, and a table that represents the exile, and a firefighter that represented by a lamp. I'm sorry. And so you can kind of project these feelings and designate these objects as one of these subcomponents, and learn to kind of enmesh the entirety of these subcomponents into one system that's working together, as opposed to fighting each other.
Yeah.
So this is again kind of this is utilizing an understanding of you're not one self, you're multiple selves, and two, utilizing your imagination in order to work with the different subcomponents inside of you.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you explained it pretty well. I just the main thing for me I found very interesting about this one was it like we said, it's projection at its finest. It highlights a psychological phenomenon that I think is very important to understanding not only ourselves, but like, understanding how we relate to others and how we act with one another in the world, which is again um, a critical component to trauma and healing from trauma is the social component. Projection in general is important to understand, which is in this case we're projecting these internal faculties that govern how we go about thinking about ourselves, thinking about others, and thinking about what we've done, our actions. We project these from within into these pieces of furniture in our room, and so we can have this, we can have a multilingual dialogue with by ourselves, and it's quite interesting, and it just goes to show the complexity of the human when they think, when you can really put your mind to the test. You can actually do a lot more than you think.
So this is similar to what I just discussed here. To the left, we have Albert Peso, and van der Kolk met this guy at a conference for psychologists, and Albert Peso demonstrated one of his techniques, which is very similar to the IFS treatment. So he would have someone with some kind of traumatic memory, say they had an emotionally abusive mother, and you draw them from the crowd and have them sit next to you, and he would act as a witness, and he would micro track their facial and body expressions. So he would say something like, a witness could see that you're very distraught at when describing this event, and you just kind of act like, hey, look, I'm seeing you, I understand what you're feeling, and you'd kind of mirror what the individual is feeling, and describe to them what their body was portraying emotionally. And then he would, once they'd kind of given a little background information, say my mom was emotionally abusive in this way, and then you'd have them draw someone from the crowd to act as their ideal mother, right? And so the mother would sit in front of them and would act and talk to them in the way that they wished their mother had. And so it's the same idea that he laid out earlier, of the child seeing the man fall, but imagining that he fell. That he fell out of the one of the twin towers, but imagining that he fell on a trampoline. It's the same idea of utilizing your imagination in order to reprocess an event in a more optimal way. And so you can do this as with an individual playing the role of the ideal individual, and making a more ideal version of a memory. Or you can use, in the same way as the IFS treatment, you can use an inanimate object. So Basil went to his farmhouse after kind of seeing this portrayed. And I mean, if you reading his book, you understand, like, this is a guy, obviously, one of the great psychologists. He talked about how he had spent a long time in psychotherapy. He's done a ton of counseling, a ton of self work, understands psychology, understands the mechanism of trauma. Nonetheless, he found this experience with Albert Peso as incredibly beneficial, where at the farmhouse, because they didn't have people to play the role of his family members. They designated a lamp as his mother or a chair as his father. He had all of his sisters represented. And he describes this incredibly visceral emotional experience. And then Albert Peso going, "Can I change your perspective on this?" And him kind of giving the go ahead. And what Albert Peso did was kind of come in between him and all the objects. And, go like, okay, like, hey, let's use our imagination to reprocess this event. Let's, now that we've gotten to the root of the emotion, let's start to heal this, and let's understand this as an event that happened in the past, and understand these parts of you, this family that still lives inside of you as a memory doesn't have complete control over you, and we can start to heal. It's incredibly interesting to understand yourself as these two components of, the firefighters, managers, and exiles, but also all the people that you've met throughout your life that still have a sway on what kind of emotions that you're experiencing, and that still kind of push you towards certain behaviors, still impact you in a specific way. And we can understand that we have all these different subcomponents living inside of us, and we can begin to utilize our imagination in a way that optimizes that fact, and that fosters a healthy relationship, as opposed to an aggressive relationship between these different beings that live inside of your psyche.
Yeah, because like even with with people in your day-to-day life, like with people that family, friends, etc. Like you said, they're living beings in your psyche. Like they're not, nothing in life gets out of that's an a priori frame. Like it has to be interpreted through the psyche. It has to go through the psyche.
Through that
And
lens.
it's just interesting because like it makes you stop and think about the fact that you yourself, like and this happens with everyone, like in knowing someone, you have a specific narrative and like an idea of who this person is. You have your specific um, perspectives about how they act, how they will act, and what they believe, and how they perceive others. Um, and you can never truly get out of it's so hard for you to get out and like understand, like, well, what's it like actually for them to what do they actually perceive, like what do they inhabit themselves, how do they think in their day-to-day, like how do they think about going about their day-to-day lives, like a large part of that is just watching how they act, but it's still just it's interesting, because you inhabit a mind and you have a certain, how you feel in your mind, like what your mind's like, and then it's just sometimes you just don't, um, it's interesting. It'd be interesting to see like it's just an interesting idea of like what is their mind like, you know what I mean, like.
Well, I mean, especially for your family. Obviously, I mean, if you know anything about neuroplasticity, as a child, your brain's more plastic than it is as an adult.
Yeah.
So the people in your immediate family were literally molding who you are as a person in a lot of ways. I mean, obviously there's nature as well as nurture, but this nurture aspect is more under our own control. And so reframing the way that you think about an individual, and reframing your internal relationship with someone, has very real and very immediate consequences on your mental health, and your
Right.
mental health.
Because you might have like a certain belief about someone, or thought of someone, someone may have acted a certain way towards you in the past, and that might stick with you. That event might stick with you. Whereas for them, that was just an event that happened, unless you voice that out and discuss that with them, or, perhaps they did understand it as uh, as a traumatic event for you, but perhaps they didn't care, or they just went on. whatever that may be. Sorry about that.
I'm gonna mute you.
Yeah, I'm sorry, man. I'll give you a second chance. Anyways, sorry, I lost my train of thought. Yeah, it's just like, this person might have seen, they come from a totally different perspective, and they might have just acted in a certain way out of fear of themselves, or fear for what may happen to them, or anger with themselves in a certain situation. So it just goes to the complexity of like our interactions with others, and like understanding, being able to have that different perspective of that different perspective, having multiple perspectives in our situations, and not, really seeking to inquire and seeking to understand and learn from other people, so that way we can, we can get to the true nature of our relationships, why we have the relationships we do, why people behave the way they do towards us, why we behave towards them, and how they feel about it, how we feel about it, and so you can have more quality relationships.
All right, this brings us to our final chapter, which is another extension of an understanding of imagination. You can think of theater as a visual representation of an individual's imaginative narrative, and a good theater performance is this telling of an important story. So we can understand the implications of witnessing an important story that has a useful life lesson as being helpful for you processing life itself or processing an event. But I think we rarely think of kind of playing out a role as being even more beneficial. Using our imagination and to inhabit a different individual entirely is, I mean, that's a strange thing that humans do, and it's something that is incredibly important to cultures all over the world. I mean, this is something that children do this really well, where when they're playing they inhabit a different role, and this is different kind of Piagetian theory on why that is. It's a kind of processing events and inhabiting the ideal version of themselves and pretending and enacting that out in order to help them develop as a human being. So van der Kolk starts off the chapter describing his son, who is kind of the stimulus for his work on this. His son suffered from chronic fatigue syndrome, and him and his wife noticed that he kind of had a spike of energy around 5, but the rest of the day he was just kind of like laying in bed. He had all these allergic reactions, all these obviously immense amount of fatigue. He wasn't really being as productive as he'd like because he was suffering from this illness. But they got him enrolled in a theater program, and he got cast in a role as someone. He got cast in a role in West Side Story, and he said he walked in on his son kind of walking around with swagger, in order to prepare for this role. And then he got cast in another role where, he was adored by all these women. And so he was practicing these roles in order to prepare for the role, or he was practicing these different characters in order to prepare for this role. But he would bring the character home with him, and he would be pretending to be this person at home as well. And so it happened to be incredibly beneficial for him getting over this chronic fatigue syndrome. And he was kind of revitalized because he was pretending to be revitalized. And so van der Kolk kind of took that and ran with it. And he was doing these studies and conducting these theaters in areas with at-risk youth, with obviously in rough areas of town, rough areas in rough cities with people that had a lot of trauma that wasn't getting dealt with. And so, you can understand this. I have up here, traumatized people are terrified to feel deeply. Well, if you're going to successfully inhabit a role that's emotionally charged, like a Shakespeare play, you're forced to feel deeply what the individual is feeling. Traumatized adolescents are inhibited, out of tune, inarticulate, and purposeless. Boom, you're cast as a role. You can't be inhibited. You can't be melancholy if you're going to play a role that requires dance and lofty behavior. You can't be out of tune and successfully participate in a theater routine with the rest of people. You have to be in tune with the rest of people. In order to be in tune with the rest of the people, you have to be in tune with yourself. You're inarticulate. You have to be articulate in order to memorize your lines and successfully verbalize them. And obviously purpose. If you're enjoying theater, that gives you a purpose. You begin to love the thing that you're devoting your time to.
Or maybe you embody the purpose, or you pursue the purpose of your character, and that
Right.
like consumes you.
Yeah.
It's
This is just another beautiful way in which imagination and pretending and play, it's called a play for a reason. You're playing out the character and you're inhabiting a new role. A lot of the time, a role that's, optimal and that allows you to feel the feeling that you've been pushing down for so long.
but like and in this form of of expression, and the primacy of theater and um, in human culture, it's so real and it's so profound. I mean, to call it, just a movie or like just a play, that's a lie in essence, because how can it be something untrue when it has such a profound effect and such a transformative effect on us, where it changes our lives, whether for the better or the worse. You can hear people who don characters or take on roles that consume them, and they just like method acting, where they like embody the role of the character in preparation for the play or the movie or the whatever it may be. And a piece of them like becomes that character in essence. And some people come out never the same after their roles. You take the famous case of Heath Ledger and the Joker. Part of that darkness kind of consumed him, and it led him to an addiction for uh, sleeping medications, just because he couldn't. He developed an insomnia. Um, I don't know if that's entirely due to the role itself. However, I don't doubt that it had some part to play in his ultimate demise. But yeah, it's the positive aspect, like you said, it gives you like a opportunity, an environment to express yourself without inhibition, to act. It gives the traumatized person almost a sense to escape from their identity, and act free as another character. They don't have to carry their guilt or their shame or their fears, because they're not them. They embody another character, and they have freedom in that to act
Okay, and
as they will.
they can bring with their character the emotion that they're experiencing in their actual life. And so even though you're kind of like living out a different life, you're still processing your own emotions. He had an intense aspect of the story where the person leading these acting lessons while they were preparing for this play, they were talking about some Shakespeare play. It's asking this traumatized child, like, what does it feel like if you were to really stab someone, and he was getting into like really feel what it feels like to embody this role. And the kid wound up, running out of the room and, swearing he would never come back, and then later coming back because, something was compelling him towards help. And this was a method in which he could find health by really tapping into his feelings in order to embody them.
Yeah, and you can take that example as like the um, the thought precedes the experience. To have that, you can initiate the experience ahead of the actual environment. You don't have to be in the environment to actually stab someone. He said, really feel what it's like to stab someone. And
Right.
in this case, terrified that person. So it's just another example of we have this ability of ourselves to where we have this ability today in our with our minds to transform ourselves from the inside out, signaling an experience ahead of its environment, um, signaling a certain emotion ahead of its environment. Even you don't even have to be in the environment to feel a certain way. But theater is a just a ancient or such a historical and deeply rooted form of externally acting these things out in the world and expressing um, feelings and truths, even you could say, that are well rooted in humanity. And to to play a role in such a profound, to play a role in a very good play, a very well structured play like a Shakespeare play or something, that has to be, that has to be life altering in a sense, to be able to really feel and experience what they're getting at. Because to take this back to the birth of tragedy, um, with Prometheus, Aeschylus, the Greek playwright. Prometheus stole fire from the gods, and this was such a monumental uh, play in Greek history. It was the apotheosis, the pinnacle of Greek tragedy. It was the birth of tragedy. That's what Nietzsche was writing about, is this ultimate form of human expression where it pretty much, in essence, it was defining or painting a picture of the true nature of reality. And to partake in that, and to even witness it, to the Greek theater was like participatory. It got the audience involved, and it really consumed them as well. And that's what made, to Nietzsche, Greek theater such a monumental form of art, and it made the Greeks so great.
Right. I mean, it's the same thing like when you're really engrossed in a movie and you find yourself sitting on the edge of your seat, and then suddenly you remember that you're watching a movie again. I mean,
Yeah.
it's that in and of itself just highlights the power of the human capacity to tell an empowering narrative. And so, you gave the example of Heath Ledger. It's these actors that we pay millions of dollars are professional because they embody the character so well. It's a little bit of a mystery why it is that we are so obsessed with this form of art. But I think it makes a lot of sense that
Mm-hmm.
using the power of your imagination in order to embody a different role and in order to feel out the emotion of a fictional character would be so beneficial for someone's actual life.
Yeah, I mean, like in all art, you could say that it's ultimately a mystery why it is why we, you know, why we flock to to great art. Why do we listen to sounds that follow a certain pattern with certain rhythmic beats? Like, why is that so entrancing? Why is that so profound? It's ultimately a mystery, like you said, because it hints at something beyond our capacity to understand, and perhaps that's another mechanism for which this works through people. Because for traumatized people, it connects them to something deeper than their current experience. Truly great art does, great theater, um, to be immersed in the theater, to be immersed in a dance, in engaging with others in an act or a dance or in a song, in a movement of a song.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I think that in essence sums up the book, and sums up, you know, the essence of healing, uh, what it
Yeah.
means to heal and to get in touch with the body. And if anyone is, if you feel like we may not have covered this well enough, or we haven't been succinct, I would ask you to look back to previous parts as well, to kind of see how we explain things there, because I think a lot of this, is a reiteration of past chapters, past parts. Community, being engaged with others, integrating with others, getting in touch with the body through breathing, yoga, and becoming mindful of our thoughts and in the way we behave in certain situations, and realizing that we have the power to engage a certain emotion and to activate a certain state of frequency of brainwaves, and to inhabit that state. Though it may take practice and it may be difficult, it is, it's simple in theory and difficult in practice. But in essence, I think this was a great summation of not only trauma, but like, just like we've said before, where this can help a lot of people, on that spectrum of being traumatized and being, having their certain, quote unquote neuroses, having their problems that they have to deal with.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just want to say thanks to everyone who's subscribing and leaving comments in the past few months. It's really great to see that these videos are interesting to more than just the two of us. So yeah, it's really cool to see see you guys kind of participating, leaving comments, and showing some love. It means a lot to us.
Yeah, if you keep loving this content, then hit that subscribe button, hit that like button.
Yeah, so this is the end of our first iteration of book reviews. We're gonna have a discussion later about what's next on the table, and yeah, we're gonna keep these going.
Yeah, and like you said, the next book's up in the air, but whenever we decide, we will get back, and we hope you like it. So, anyways.
Do you